Washington, D.C., and we also lead ground-level work in the great state of Ohio. In addition to my own policy work, I've spent several years working to implement rigorous standards in urban Catholic and public charter school classrooms, both as a teacher and also as a network administrator. And also, I do want to let you know I'm able to kind of look at the live stream a little bit, so do feel free to stop me as you have been to ask questions. I hope to keep this as interactive as you've been able to keep the rest of the morning. I really am honored to be with you here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about the content and rigor of both the Common Core state standards as well as the Alaska standards for English language arts and math that were in place prior to 2012. I hope to explain why the Common Core are clearer and more rigorous than the vast majority of state standards and why they are superior to those that you did replace in 2012. So again, I really hope to kind of get into the weeds a little bit on the content and the rigor of the expectations. As you all well know, for nearly 2 decades, state standards have been the cornerstone of our modern education system. State governments have long set minimum expectations for each grade level or band across all grades, K through 12. And these are meant to ensure that all students, regardless of race or socioeconomic status, are held to the same expectations. And we do actually have ample evidence that without clear objectives, teachers will, often unconsciously, raise or lower their expectations based on the abilities and background of the students in front of them, rather than based on what will help ensure that students are on path towards college or towards the workforce. Yet we've also known, as I know Chris alluded to earlier this morning, for a long time that in far too many states, including Alaska, the previous state standards set the bar far too low, leaving a real content and expectations gap between schools and classrooms. But are the Common Core, as either written or as they were adapted by Alaska, are they the right solution to this problem? I think in order to answer that question, we want to understand 5 facts about the Common Core. First, the Common Core effort is and has always been a state-led effort to improve the quality and rigor of K-12 academic standards, and Alaska leaders were initially full participants. And this is actually why, because it's state-led, was exactly why Alaska was able to opt out of the CCSS without penalty in 2010 when the standards were released. 2, the Common Core state standards are significantly stronger than the Alaska standards that were in place prior to 2012. 3, the Common Core English standards prioritize the importance of reading rigorous, high-quality literature in English class and also nonfiction in history, science, and other courses. 4th, the Common Core math standards prioritize the most important math content at each grade level, including a heavy dose of math facts and arithmetic in the early grades where it's most needed. And 5, for all states, but particularly for Alaska, which has charted its own path on standards adoption in the Common Core era, educators retain full control over curriculum, instruction, and pedagogy where it belongs, which is at the local level. But let's dive deeper into the rigor of the standards themselves. If I leave you with nothing else, I really hope that I'm successful in underlining this critical point, that the Common Core are significantly clearer and more rigorous than the Alaska ELA and math standards that were in place prior to 2012. We at the Fordham Institute have been evaluating state standards for more than 15 years. In 2010, we released a comprehensive review of the clarity and specificity and the content and rigor of every state's existing ELA and math standards, along with our final evaluation of the Common Core. And in that analysis, the Common Core earned a B+ from our ELA experts and an A- from our math experts. In the same evaluation, Alaska's ELA and math standards earned an F and a D, respectively. Even still, though, when the final version of the Common Core state standards were released in 2010, the standards were not meant to serve as the totality of the state's expectations, but instead to define the core, the essential ELA and math knowledge that all students need. And as leaders of the Common Core Standards Initiative made clear at the time, states who adopted the Common Core were encouraged to customize the standards to meet their state's unique needs by adding state-specific features that build upon this core, and also to strengthen the standards so that the expectations meet the needs of the students and teachers in their state. And several states have actually done precisely that. In Massachusetts, for instance, the State Board of Education asked a committee of educators, including English teachers and university professors, to review the Common Core and compare them to the Massachusetts curriculum framework, which was widely considered to be among the best in the nation. And that committee unanimously recommended the Common Core adoption because the members felt that the Common Core was, quote, unequivocal in its insistence upon academic rigor and high expectations for all students K through 12. But their support also came with some recommendations. They did not, for instance, want to lose Massachusetts' strong standards for pre-kindergarten, nor did they want to lose the guidance that was found in the state's list of exemplar texts. To address those and other concerns, the state board voted, also unanimously, to adopt the Common Core, but with several strategic additions. The board added the Massachusetts pre-K expectations. They added specific standards, including several that added genre-specific content in ELA. They included their own list of exemplar texts. And that means that today the Massachusetts Common Core standards look different than those that guide teaching and learning in other states. It also means that Massachusetts did not simply replace its previous strong standards with something less rigorous. It took the best of both and created something even stronger that kept them, in the words of their own commissioner, quote, right where they should be, at the table with other states to collaborate on innovative curricular and instructional strategies that will benefit students and educators for years to come. There are also benefits from the commonness of the Common Core that should be acknowledged. Teachers in Common Core states have access to a far greater number of curricular and instructional resources, many of them free, than students and teachers in non-Common Core states. Indeed, because publishers, both large and small, have access to a larger market for Common Core aligned materials, the possibility of innovation is far greater. Whereas in the past, educators were subject to the whims of a smaller number of textbook creators who were able to define quality and control the market, in the Common Core era, their monopoly has been challenged. And as a result, the result is teacher access to a far greater number of resources that can meet the needs of a far more diverse set of learners. In addition, Common Core states have had the opportunity to collaborate with other states on assessment development and professional development in a way that was just not possible before for states who have not adopted the Common Core. Of course, the benefits of commonness are less important than the quality of the standards themselves. But on this point, again, let me be clear. The Common Core are among the clearest and most rigorous of any K-12 ELA and math standards in the world. By choosing to leverage the Common Core and add to them to the best of Alaska's previous standards, you have the opportunity to create a set of standards that will rival the best in the world. And this is something that even some of the Common Core's fiercest critics have acknowledged. For example, Sandra Stosky, who is one of the fiercest critics and who I know you'll hear from later today, has acknowledged that for most states, going backward makes little sense. Sandra Stosky has said, quote, states are unlikely to want to return to the standards they once had. She wrote this last year, and she explained that they wouldn't want to do this because they would be rightly accused of returning to, quote, non-rigorous standards. Also, talking about international comparisons, when judged against international standards for ELA and math, the Common Core fares equally well. Between 2009 and 2010, we at the Fordham Institute reviewed the quality of the standards that provide the foundation for several national and international assessments. The NAEP, the PISA, which I know you talked about this morning, the PEARLS for ELA, and the NAEP, the PISA, and the TIMS for math. In math, we found that the Common Core was as good as the standards that undergirded the TIMS and better than the NAEP and the PISA. And in ELA, we found that the Common Core outperformed all three. In spite of the evidence of rigor, there are several critics who have spread countless myths about what the standards ask, who's behind them, and what they mean for our teachers and students. So for the purposes of today's conversation, I wanted to address 4 of the most prominent critiques to demonstrate how they don't hold up under scrutiny. First, and perhaps most importantly, especially for ELA teachers and for parents, many critics mistakenly believe that the Common Core inappropriately prioritized nonfiction over literature in English language arts classrooms. This argument rests on 2 dubious assumptions or misrepresentations. First, many have either misread or deliberately misrepresented a 2-paragraph section that appears on page 5 of the introduction of the Common Core. That introduction suggests that teachers should, quote, follow NAEP's lead in balancing the reading of literature with the reading of informational texts, including texts in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. Following NAEP's lead would mean that 4th, 8th, and 12th graders would spend 50, 55, and 70% of their time reading informational texts. Some people have led others to believe that these percentages are meant to direct learning exclusively in English classrooms, but they are not. In fact, the Common Core immediately clarifies, no fewer than 3 times, I believe, that, quote, the percentages reflect the sum of student reading, not just reading in ELA settings. Teachers of senior English classes, for example, are not required to devote 70% of reading to informational texts, end quote. What high school students read in science and history class would count as well. That means that the only place where the Common Core explicitly mentions the amount of time teachers should spend on literary versus non-literary reading is to clarify that literary studies should dominate text selection in literature classrooms. To be clear, though, the Common Core does ask for an increase in the amount of time and attention devoted to informational text and to literary nonfiction, both in literature and in science and social studies. But this is merely a correction of the distressingly small percentage of time that's currently devoted to reading appropriately complex, content-rich informational text that students need to build vocabulary and deepen comprehension. This is especially important in the elementary grades, where students have almost no access to rigorous and interesting informational texts. In fact, research has suggested that as few as 10% of books in lower elementary classroom libraries are informational, and that first graders spend as little as 3.6 minutes each day interacting with informational texts. That puts them behind their international peers and does not equip them with the skills they need to succeed in a 21st century information economy. Yet reading informational text, particularly in the early grades, is a well-documented way to increase academic and domain-specific vocabulary, two necessary elements of reading comprehension. And this is precisely why education leaders like E.D. Hirsch are supportive of the Common Core, because the standards, if faithfully implemented, have the potential to bring content and rigor back to the curriculum. But the fear that informational text will somehow supplant literary study in Common Core classrooms rather than supplement it is unfounded. The standards devote two entire appendices to helping to clarify text complexity and to outlining exemplar texts that meet the standards' complexity requirements. And those exemplar texts address a variety of genres. They include works by literary giants like Thoreau, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Harper Lee, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. The small number of advanced technical documents included in these lists, while important, are dwarfed by the volume of great authors and works of literature and literary nonfiction that the Common Core holds up as exemplary. In other words, while some suggest that the Common Core will lead to the end of great literature, the reality is that for the past several decades, we've seen erosion in the complexity of text being assigned in schools. The dumbing down of the curriculum comes at a time when our students need rigorous preparation the most, and the Common Core seeks to right that wrong by refocusing our attention on reading texts that are worth reading and doing the kind of higher-order literary analysis that will prepare students for college-level work. A second common myth is that the Common Core standards promote low-level math skills, or that they prioritize math, quote, practices, or, quote, fuzzy math over critical content. But again, a close reading of the standards reveals that the opposite is true. The Common Core math standards prioritize essential content, and they allow the time and the space needed for deep mastery of that content. In the early grades, this means that arithmetic is heavily weighted and that students are asked to learn to automaticity, that means learn cold, their basic math facts, and that they are asked to master the standard algorithms. This is content they need to know and that they need to know cold in order to be prepared for upper-level math that they will do in high school and beyond. If there's one thing that we know with certainty, it's that math is cumulative. You cannot move on to more advanced content until you have fully mastered essential prerequisite knowledge and skills. Third, some critics complain that the Common Core don't require algebra in the 8th grade, something that many think is essential to prepare students for advanced math in high school. The reality, however, is that the kindergarten through 7th grade Common Core standards include all of the prerequisite content that students will need to be prepared for 8th grade. And that means that it's the states, districts, or schools who will decide themselves what the course and graduation requirements will be. Finally, some argue that adoption of the Common Core or any K-12 academic standards will usurp local control over curriculum and instruction. On the contrary, by setting standards rather than adopting statewide curricula, state education leaders are ensuring that local district school and teacher leaders remain in control of the decisions that most directly impact the students they serve. On the ELA side, this means that local leaders and teachers can and will choose the text that students will read. It means that parents, teachers, and leaders still need to work together to define the content-rich curriculum their children should be learning. Standards set a minimum bar, a floor, and not a ceiling. They are designed only to help to define the outcomes that will help ensure that all students have the opportunity to learn the content they need to succeed. But educators still drive curriculum and instruction, and leaders still make critical school-level decisions. In the end, Common Core, or any standards, is a classroom-level reform. It's meant to refocus planning, curriculum, and instruction on the things that matter most to reading comprehension, books that are worth reading, content that is worth learning, and reading and writing that is tied directly to both. Whether the promise of the Common Core is realized depends on whether leaders are able to look past the politics and into the classroom and make the decisions that are in the best interest of the students that we all hope to serve. Again, I thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your presentation, and it's good to hear the myths that we've all heard really discussed in some detail. I guess maybe you're the wrong person to ask, but I'll ask it anyway.